Hello and welcome to this impromptu Born Book interview. I'm ST Wickett. I'm joined by Alexander Adams, who's recently been a guest on Our Current Predicament. Alex, you've written an article in the Telegraph today about the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Arts. First of all, what does your article entail and what is the problem we're looking at today?
Okay, well, this is actually an interview with me, including material about the ICA. So I haven't written it, so I don't actually know what's in this article, which is coming out today. But I have contributed to it. So basically, the essence is that the ICA is the Institute of Contemporary Art in London. It was founded in the 1940s when there was not much space for recent art. There weren't very many venues. It performed quite a useful function. It's still run today. It's run on public money, largely, also donations from large companies and some charities and so forth. And it's become increasingly left-wing. And I think that we all knew about this in the art world, but it crystallized on the 1st of October 2018 when Chelsea Manning was invited to give a talk that was hosted by the ICA, not actually at the ICA venue, but the ICA planned it, they ran it, they financed it and everything. So Chelsea Manning was just there to talk about basically politics, technology, gender issues and so forth. So there was no artistic content at all. So this was the ICA engaging in political activity. I would call it political campaigning by proxy. And following that, I wrote a letter to the Charity Commission, which was sent to the Department of Culture as well, because the Department of Culture pays money towards the ICA through the Arts Council. And basically that went nowhere. And then in 2020, the ICA kind of went off the deep end with lockdown, and they started sending out daily email press releases. And these were just of the most extreme kind of political stuff you could imagine. It was black activism. It was stuff about historical slavery. It was anti-capitalism. It was eco-extremism, transgender, advocating for sex work, just everything subversive and progressive you could imagine was pumped into these emails.
And none of it related to the visual arts?
There was some material that did relate to visual arts. So they were recommending films or music or documentary. Well, not documentaries, but there was a little bit of art in there. But there were whole press releases just full of political stuff, just political activism, getting you to join groups, asking you to contribute towards, like the bail fund in the USA. I think they did that. Anyway, they went completely off the deep end, and it was clear that the ICA had decided that its future lay in political campaigning rather than arts. And we'll come to why that's a problem in a minute. And then on the 6th of June last year, they had a press release that talked about how they were working with an artist, and they mortgaged part of the property of the ICA. And this is a fun fact: the ICA doesn't actually own that property; they lease it. So they've got they don't have any control over the deeds, over the property at all. So it was a stunt, but it's verging on the illegal, I think, to start offering mortgages on the property. The reason they did this was they were mortgaging the doors, which were made from mahogany, and this was, of course, related to the slave trade, or so they claimed. Anyway, so this is another political stunt that they got involved in. And then on the 30th of June, they issued a press release about an event called War in a Babylon, the Community's Struggle for Truths and Rights, which I'll read here I will read the press release. And this is basically, it's all about the situation in Tottenham to do with the Black community and policing. And so this is from the press release. The exhibition, the first of its kind to accurately assess the conditions of Black lives across Britain, will be accompanied by an extensive public programme presented both in Tottenham and at the ICA that will include film screenings, community educational groups, talks, cultural events, performances and a digital presentation focusing on the interrelation between artificial intelligence and racism, end quote. So basically there's no art involved. And this is a problem. I've written to the Charity Commission again saying there is a problem with the ICA using its buildings and its money and its facilities for promotion of political material. And that has gone, that letter has kind of prompted a journalist at the Sunday Telegraph to write an article which will be coming out on the day this video is released, the 4th of July.
Independence Day for our for our American listeners. You said that there are both legal and moral implications for this move. Let's start with the legal one. You said there were 3 main legal issues going on here.
Yeah. Firstly, the ICA is incorporated to present visual arts. And that's in its charter, that's in its memorandum of association. It is not supposed to be doing anything else apart from that. It can engage in a little bit of educational activity to do with the presentation of the visual arts. So they might have educational workshops around that. But basically, it has to be centered on art. Recently, the ICA has got involved in a whole series of events, including I quote, a queer techno rave held at the ICA, which is on the Mall, very close to Buckingham Palace for anyone who doesn't know London. And that's basically, it's a political issue, it's a social issue, it's a provocation, but it's not art. So it's outside the terms of its incorporation. The second problem is that it's a registered charity. Registered charities are not permitted to engage in political campaigning outside of their core function. So if you've got a charity which is Save the Elephants, then you can lobby to do with the regulation of the ivory trade, for example.
Right. Yeah.
But you can't start lobbying to do with get Donald Trump out. You can only do stuff if it's related to the ivory trade or elephants or whatever.
Like that's the problem, though, isn't it? Is that the makeup of the regime is such that institutions that do step outside of their purview and engage in, sort of topical politic are sort of, allowed to do so.
Yeah. Well, basically, it's the institutional capture by the left, by all of the judiciary, House of Lords, House of Commons, all the big political parties, all of them charities, and indeed, I fear the Charities Commission are predisposed to support causes that they agree with, whether they are within the legal framework or not. So I think that the law actually doesn't matter that much, I think, which is has been proved because we've had numerous complaints about the ICA working outside its remit and not getting punished, and basically because it's working for the causes that the cathedral, that the institutions approve of. Now, if they were advocating for stripping migrants of their rights or creating a white ethno state, I think you'd see the institutions coming down pretty hard on that.
And rightly so. I mean, it's just sort of one-sided enforcement of the rules, right?
Yeah. And the third legal problem is that the ICA is collecting funds, both in terms of grants from the central government, from local government, from NGOs and from charities, on the basis that they are going to use this money for arts programming. They are clearly, if you look down at their press releases, because this is all on their website, look down at their press releases, look down at their scheduled events, a vast amount of their work is political. It's political campaigning, pure and simple. So what's happening is money that is earmarked for the arts is going into political campaigning, and that seems highly unethical, as well as I don't know how legal it is either.
What about the moral questions raised by such a program?
Well, I would say that the moral issue is that if you accept what is happening now, which is called Artivism, which is activism through art venues. So it's artists who are basically acting as social justice activists who are using the venues, the money, and the status of arts organisations to promote their causes. I think that the problem is that if you accept that that is valid, and that often happens because of postmodernism, which blurs the line between art and non-art. So if you start saying anything can be art, well, suddenly politics is art, and oh look, the political activists suddenly have their hands on a whole bunch of organizations and funds that they never had access to before. And I think the problem is that if you accept the premise that politics belongs in an art gallery, then suddenly, and you also say that art is utilitarian in that it serves a function. It's there to educate people about vaccines or the environment or social justice or whatever. If you accept that that is valid, what happens to the abstract paintings, the still lifes, the flower paintings, the historical art? Because suddenly, how can you possibly say that any one watercolor or any one landscape is more valuable than the cause of fighting for social justice or women's reproductive rights or whatever? Suddenly you introduce basically a pike into the carp pool, and this pike will eat everything. It will completely devour anything edible in that pond, and you'll end up with arts venues becoming social activism centers.
Suddenly Friedrich and Goya and Raphael become, obsolete because they aren't serving a function.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically all of art becomes obsolete.
It's like there's that trope, right, of the sort of hyper modern artist who draws like a red circle on a white canvas and a yellow dot in the middle, and the yellow dot represents his confinement to his childhood or something like that, and it's you can you don't need to make good art if you can just like explain with like impenetrable jargon why the art exists. That's always been a trope with modern art, but now it's like you can literally do quite literally nothing, right? I saw that there was like a invisible sculpture sold for like a stupid amount of money. I say invisible, there was nothing there, right? Again, as someone who's outside of the arts, I'm sort of struggling to see how art as a sort of vocation can come back from this if it's suddenly held to this almost Stalinist interpretation of art is only valid if it serves the dominant ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. It's essentially socialist realism, but it's socialist realism without any of the realism, any of the art. It's conceptual art or performances or documentaries, and this is what you're seeing with these art collectives. Because pay attention to the way the wind is blowing. Have a look at the list of the arts, the nominees for the Turner Prize, which is the premier arts prize in Britain. And all of I think it's 5 nominees, all of them are art collectives. So not a single artist is named in the press release. These are all groups that focus on different issues. You've got one for mental health, one for Black Afro-futurism, another one for, I can't remember what they are all now, but they all have their own focuses. And these are basically utilitarian groups saying that politics is absolutely essential. And as a painter of portraits or landscapes or even slightly more political stuff, how do you edge your way in when you're confronted by these collectives, which are so articulate and have so many resources, and also they have changing personnel, so they never rest, they never stop, because you have people leaving and other people joining. How are you ever going to compete for space or resources with these hives? These hives of political activity, which are essentially crafted to absorb money and attention from arts organizations.
This is something that we discussed the last time I interviewed you, which is sort of how modern artists sort of project their own almost mediocrity. Is this artists who just sort of, to put it bluntly, can't be bothered to make something nice? So instead they do this because it's easier to be an activist than to painstakingly make a piece of art that's going to last forever.
Yeah, but because also this is a large part comes from art schools, or they're part of they're part of universities now. The art faculties have been de-skilled. A lot of the artists who are teaching there don't know how to make art
Mm.
because they in turn were de-skilled in the 1960s or 70s when they were growing up. And what happens is that and there is also this postmodern attitude that everything is subjective and your work is essentially to do with how well you can implement political change. And you are encouraged to be an activist. There are people who are encouraged, who say that curating is a social justice activity, that art collecting is a social justice activity. And it's true for practicing artists as well. So you have artists who are told, you don't need to have skills, you don't need to be committed, you don't need to develop a signature style, but as long as you have the right politics, hey, you've got access to all these different art venues. And I think that because of these incentives, you are leading people who are not skilled and not committed artists into an area just because it makes them a living, because it's very difficult to get things wrong, it's difficult to be criticized.
Is it is it time now for artists who are more classically focused or just not politically focused, just focused on the art itself, to almost secede themselves from the arts establishment and just sort of, put up their own exhibits? Or is it, or is the arts, or is the cultural regime such that any attempt would just be squashed?
Well, this is exactly the thing that I'm wrestling with now for my talk, which I'm going to be giving at the event at the end of August. And it's basically, we have to distance ourselves from the institutions, because the institutions, as it is at the moment, they are completely captured.
Mm.
And they have let in this Trojan horse of wanting to do good through art. And they've let in a whole bunch of political activists who are absolutely going to ransack the institutions because they feel no loyalty towards the institutions. They feel no commitment to art. They will just burn this down. They will strip it completely bare and then move on. They don't care if they ruin institutions. The ICA is being run into the ground by a political activist. So when the ICA is finally closed or it goes bankrupt, then what's going to happen is the top guy, Stefan Kalmar, who's German, who spent most of lockdown in Berlin, in his flat in Berlin, he will just move on to Barcelona or Milan or Florida or Shanghai or something. He's not going to suffer any consequences at all. And this is what will happen with artists and curators. If they get involved in the arts, they will exploit it for all it's worth. They'll burn it to the ground and then they will just move on. They're like locusts.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of there's a bit early on in Camus' The Plague, where the rats start dying, right? And all that means is that the plague is jumping to the next host, right? So so once the rats, the rat in this metaphor being the ICA or the British art establishment, once those rats start dying, like I said, it goes to Spain, France, Italy, Germany, Sweden, Norway. It will just find a new host because it's by nature it's parasitic.
Yeah, and that's how it's developed itself.
It's infect, subvert, destroy, move on.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that I don't know what's going to happen with this article on Sunday. It's in the Sunday Telegraph. I don't know if this is going to actually wake up a lot of people. It should do, because we in the arts have been seeing this quite a lot. And people have been noticing, it's weird that they've got an art collective, or it's kind of odd that art museum wanted to open up as a vaccination centre and so on. But people haven't put it all together. And I'm hoping that with this article, people will start to see that there's a real problem with politics actually parasitizing the arts. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know if the Charities Commission is going to revoke the registered status. Because I should point out that I don't object to people, because I'm in favor of free speech, and people say, well, you're trying to shut down free speech. No, I'm saying people are perfectly entitled to speak, and they should speak, but they shouldn't be doing it in public arts venues. Go to another venue. There are plenty of places that would welcome that, plenty of community centres, plenty of cooperative spaces, plenty, even private art galleries. They would host this stuff. There's plenty of money. There's millions and millions of pounds being pumped into Artivism through charities and millionaire donors and so forth. So there's no need for it to be in publicly funded arts venues. Keep publicly funded arts venues for art, and then you do your weird crossover stuff in places that aren't funded by the Arts Council. So speak away. And also, I have to say that I've got no particular comment about the validity of the Tottenham policing situation. I don't know anything about it. I'm not going to comment. It might be a perfectly important issue, but I'm saying that it shouldn't. This is not a forum where it should be discussed. It should be in somewhere else.
Well, that's the problem, though, isn't it? Where due to the curational staff, it is welcomed. You said, go to this place. I'm sure that they'll welcome it. Well, they kind of don't need to, because the centralized art institutions, have flung the door open to this thing.
Yeah, and the issue is, if organizations can abuse their charity status like this, then it's kind of clear that that the rules are not being applied equally. The biggest, the ICA could continue in its present form, doing exactly what it does, holding events like this, and I would not complain at all if it did not get money from the British tax-paying organisations, and also if it lost its tax-free status, because registered charity means you don't pay tax, and it would put them into a whole world of hurt if they lost that status. So I'm saying, fine, let's have the ICA. It can do exactly what it's doing, but without public finance.
And then the question then inevitably turns to our supposedly conservative government, who are either completely okay with this or just so apathetic that they aren't going to do anything to stop this. Because supposedly, the government that is supposed to represent the right of British politics, well, obviously. I think that's obviously it doesn't, but on paper, it could step in and prevent this sort of thing with, as you said, with closing the floodgates of funding. Yeah.
So the letter that I wrote to the Charity Commission was also sent to the Department of Digital Media, Culture and Sport. The Secretary of State is Oliver Dowden, and Dowden and Jendrick did the passed the ruling that to prevent the removal of statues. So it's kind of clear that they do know that there is an issue regarding statues and institutions being unwilling to protect statues. And let's see if they also recognise that there's a problem with institutions being unwilling to protect the ring fencing of arts funding for arts. If they take action, they could say, yeah, you can't, the Charity Commission will absolutely have to be more rigorous about enforcing its laws. And also we are going to blacklist certain organizations if they use arts funding for political campaigning.
Also for campaigning that attacks the British arts canon, if this is allowed to go on, how long before someone like JMW Turner is kicked to the curb?
Yeah, because there are all sorts. There are no artists who don't have some sort of skeleton in their closet if you look hard enough, or even if you're politically minded, you can distort something, you can invent something, and it will, it will gain common currency without anyone actually bothering to check. So yeah, there are all sorts of artists who you could target because they said they used a racist term in sort of 1900s, right, or they treated their wife badly, or they inherited their children, or they shot rare animals on safari. There is no artist who could be preserved from political witch hunts or cancel culture, retrospective cancel culture.
What do you hope to come from this article?
I think, there's two things. First is I hope it will start a wider debate, especially amongst the general public, about the way that arts funding is being diverted. And also, I hope that the second thing is that it actually becomes a political issue,
Mm.
so that this is raised with the Department of Culture, that the Arts Council has to start justifying what it's doing in terms of its spending, and that there is more focus on the role of different charities and NGOs, such as the Freelance Foundation and Ford Foundation and so forth, which are explicitly political in their aims.
Mm.
And them giving money to public venues is a very difficult point, because it introduces the idea that they may have some influence over programming, which I think is quite sinister. So what hopefully will happen with this article is that we'll start a general discussion about these issues and highlight them for people who didn't know that they really existed, even though they probably felt a little uneasy about some of the things they were seeing.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah, great. I think we'll leave it there. Mr. Adams, thank you again for your clear insights. I hope the very best for this mission of yours.
Thank you very much. When I said I was looking forward to speaking to you again, I didn't realise it would be quite so soon. But, anyway, thanks for having me on.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.